Hey friends, today we're going to be talking about a really cool tool called compression. Now, this can be used for your music, for your audio tracks, and it can also be used for anybody who's making content with recorded speech. It is such a powerful thing that you're going to want to know how to use, when to use, and why to use it. And don't tell the people who are charging in order to do compression on people's podcasts, but you can actually do this all completely for free if you just understand how to use this compression tool, which I'm going to teach you today. Now, if you still want to pay me to do it for you because you just think it would be easier and faster and better for you, I'm game, but you won't need to after this video. So first off, let's talk a little bit about microphones and what they do. Human ears are really, really cool, and they also don't pick up large amounts of difference if you move a little closer to the person you're talking to or a little further away. But microphones are far more sensitive. There's a lot of different types of microphones, but in general, every mic will have a little bit of this issue where if I move a little bit closer or a little bit farther away on a specific take, then you're going to hear a large difference. Compression is a tool to kind of get rid of that problem and make it so you don't sound like all of a sudden you're right in someone's ear and then all of a sudden you're on the other side of the room when you're moving just a little bit away from your microphone. Now you can probably imagine this is a problem that comes up whenever you're using microphones. So you got vocal performances or those podcasters, those content creators that are speaking into microphones. This is something that you will have happening all the time and you might not even realize it. And in fact, a lot of your audience might not even fully realize it on a conceptual level, what's happening. But oh my gosh, this can make the largest quality difference when you remove this problem with compression. I find a lot of podcasts that I listen to, which are really great and have awesome content, not doing this. And I can barely hear people at times because of it. And it makes for just a much worse listening experience. This is a powerful tool that your viewers will really, really thank you for. Now, let's show how compression can actually solve this problem. With all sorts of music, we have large dynamic ranges in volume. So for here, you can see that we've got a large peak, drops off a little bit, comes back, and then another peak. And this is how loud the signal is at different parts. This is where you have usually like the start of your syllables or the start of your guitar note or your piano attack, and then it fades down and goes through. Compression can be a surgical way to cut off how loud things can get and raise how quiet things can get. It basically takes your entire dynamic range and flattens it so it's much more natural. You don't want to use this all the time in music, but you do want to use it a lot in your content and in your speeches. So let's take a look at some of the 5 different tools we have of controlling compression. First off, we have threshold. Now this is where you're going to start lowering how loud your signal can get. You can move this threshold anywhere in your signal. So this one, let's say we got halfway down. Maybe this is negative 6 dB or something if you're in an audio workstation. And then the amount it's going to be reduced, you can see up in red here. This is controlled by your ratio. Think of it, if you would go above that threshold by any amount, let's say you go above by 10 dB, if your ratio is set to 2, you're only going to be going above by instead half of that. So a 1/2 ratio, or 5 dB. If we set the ratio instead to 5, instead of going up by 10 dB, in that sense, you're going to go over by 1/5 or 10/5. So you can go up by 2 dB. The ratio is very, very important. And also, as you probably could guess, if you use a ratio of 1, it's not going to do anything at all. Same thing if your threshold is set way too high that you're never actually going above it with the volume of your signal. So these things are very important to just don't set it to 1. Otherwise, it's never going to actually do anything. Next here, we've got attack and release. So you can kind of see here that there's a slight difference in the signal. It doesn't have its sharp peak as much. That's because this attack changes how the waveform reacts. It changes the transients, and the release can do the same thing. So while down here isn't actually getting compressed, not going above the threshold, because we have our release really long, the compressor is holding everything down until, let's say, 500 milliseconds go by, and then it lets it come back up much more naturally. So this one little peak here that goes above our threshold keeps our signal down until all the way over here, because the release is really, really long. But we can change that. So now this little peak over here comes back to not doing anything by, let's say, 40 milliseconds after it's actually happened. An attack is very similar, but in the other way, it's how fast you're going to react to the signal. How, like, immediate, once you go above that threshold, you're just going to smack it on the head and be like, no, stay down there. So you got to play around with attack and release. In general, you want somewhat of a fast attack and not too slow of a release. Something like this would probably be good for almost everyone. Now, how does compression actually lift the low parts of your signal? That is using this specific thing down here, makeup gain. If you don't ever actually use this, all you're doing is cutting off the highs and not raising any of the low volume parts. So you've got to make sure that you're also messing with the makeup gain to bring up the low parts of your signal and then crush everything down underneath that threshold. It's a give and take, a balance of makeup gain and threshold to get your signal looking much flatter and not having to worry about these really close up or really far away sounds, because your compression is going to take those really far away sounds and give it a bunch of makeup gain to make it sound like you're in your normal space and things aren't changing as much. Or it's going to take these really close up sounds and put all the compression on it and punch it back down so it stays within its right range. And instead of getting this weird sort of like, all of a sudden you're talking to me and you're not moving much, but you sound like you're on the other side of the room or right up in my ear, you get a lot more of the natural stuff that you want to have a regular conversation with someone. And this is so good for vocals too, because a lot of singers will move their microphones around or sing really close and really high and loud at some parts and really soft and you can barely hear them in others. So compression is your way to take that and make it sound better. So now let's talk about how to use this compression tool completely for free within Reaper. And I'm probably just going to touch on content for now and then get into a different video later on how to use compression in your songs and your mixes, because this video is already getting a little long and I don't want to drag on. So if we go into Reaper, which is completely free, you can get one of their automatically built-in compressors. You just have to click the FX, add a compressor, and then you'll see some of the stuff we talked about already. It's got its threshold at whatever dB that you want to set it to. Let's see if we play this here. Yeah, three very important aspects. We're getting somewhere around negative 10.6 dB is when we're averaging out. So the threshold probably wants to be a little bit lower than that. And then our ratio, remember, is how much we're doing to that compression. So we're going to leave the ratio at 4. Gain here is just your makeup gain. So we probably want to bring all of it up by like, no, let's try 4 dB or something like that. Attack, usually you want it to be somewhat slow. Release a little or somewhat fast for attack, and release slower but not too slow. And this mix, you don't really need to worry about it. It basically, all it does is you don't have to use just compression. You can use a bit of half and half almost. So if we had the mix at 0, we wouldn't be doing anything. If we had the mix at 100, we're only using the compression stuff. So this is what I do in my process for making videos. This is a previous take that I did, and you can see when you're going in here. Today we're going to be looking at 3 very important aspects for creating video game. You've got the actual compression being applied to it. You've got your makeup gain boosting it. And I'll even render out a version of this signal so we can see the differences in the waveforms. Because right now we've got these large peaks at the start of things that I talk about, and then it slows down and it's not as loud for the rest of it. And then different takes have different loudness volumes here, as you can see throughout the entire spectrum. So now I've gone and rendered out the difference between no compression and compression. And as you can see, looking at the signal here, Everything is much better in its volume range. We've squished it down and we brought up all the low end, so you don't have these very different, large, really close up moments versus really far away sounds. And I'm exaggerating this, as you can probably imagine. It's not quite as staunch of a difference when you're just talking and moving tiny bits, but when you do move in between takes, if you move your chair, if you start getting really close, you will start to notice these differences. And a little bit of compression can go such a long way. And it's pretty simple. You can figure out how to use all this stuff just using these tools: threshold, makeup gain. Try it out and see what you think sounds good. And I will warn you, you do not want to use too much makeup gain so that this starts going into the red. If it gets above the 0 dB mark, that's bad. That's what we call clipping, and that's where it's going to just sound entirely awful. So don't push it up too much. It should still have some room to breathe at the top ends of these tracks, but you do still want to push it up. Now, in keeping with the theme of understanding why compression is important, I've decided not to compress this video, so it might sound a little bit crazy at times, but hopefully that helps get the point across of why this is an important thing to do. Now, I'll jump into more of how to use compression in your musical tracks later on. And if you are enjoying these videos, if you find this helpful, please leave me a like and subscribe. I'm really trying to give everybody out there great content that you can use to make your experiences, your content better. That's one of my goals, and I would appreciate if you find this helpful. Give me that like and subscribe.